wonderful opportunity, this privilege to come together and think together and pray together and look for visions and dreams to come true. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Tomorrow night, Merry Light will occupy this pulpit. For those who come from out of town or come only in the evenings, be an opportunity to hear Merry Light. I'll speak tomorrow morning. We will have a speaker at 4 o'clock tomorrow. We have some wonderful folks. We had a wonderful address by Zeta Sherry this afternoon, and we're going to have a wonderful week. I thought that tonight I'd like to talk about the first camp farthest out. It was held 4,000 years ago, and 2,000 years before the coming of Jesus. The experience then was so similar to what our camps has been. For instance, we had a camp in California at Glendora. But after 2 years, they said the place is too small for us. We've got to find a bigger place. So we went to Whittier College for 2 years, and then they said this place is too small for us, and we went to Pomona College. After 2 years, they said this place is too small for us, and ever since then we've gone to Redlands University. We had a camp in Ohio at Denison, and after a number of years we decided we should have a bigger place, and they went to Ohio Wesleyan for this year. 540 people have signed up, and they're turning down closing all registrations. Biggest camp we ever had. Well, that's the experience of this first camp farthest out. A young man said to the director of the camp, "This place is too small for us. Let us go down to the Jordan, and each one of us will cut down a tree, and we'll, by working together in a cooperative effort, we'll build a larger place." And the director said, "All right, you go." And then the young man said, "Won't you go too?" And he said, "I will go." And he went. The reason I call this the first camp farthest out is because it was not a school for the priests, it was a school for the prophets. The Levites were the priests, but this was one open to the prophets. A theological seminary trains one in church history and church dogma and does wonderful work in the study of the Bible and teaches them how to give sermons and how to conduct every member canvass and a lot of organizational things. They don't have time to teach prayer or practicing the presence of God. All the theological professors I've talked with say that's our one lack. They know less about prayer when they graduate, usually, than when they come in. It's a thing we didn't think we could teach them. Now, the camp farthest out doesn't teach you doesn't give you church history or the rituals or the dogmas of the church. It doesn't take time to teach you how to give sermons or raise the ever-member canvas. The only thing we teach here is how to pray and how to practice the presence of God and how to let God work through you in your creative writing or painting and everything else. It exposes you to be a channel, as what they call the prophets in those days. So this was a school for the prophets. The founder of it was very much like the founder of the Camps Farthest Out. He was a little bit overweight. He never did anything that anyone else could do for him. He was constitutionally lazy. When you'd ask him to think a thing through, he'd say, "That's too hard, let us pray." Well, and so when Naaman came down, famous as General MacArthur of his day, he had a whole cavalcade of cavalry with him. When the news was brought in to Elisha that Naaman was there, he just remained in his study, reading the Reader's Digest, and he said, "You tell General Naaman to go and jump in the lake." Well, that insulted Naaman. He said at least he should have come out and bowed and been polite. Aren't the rivers of Babylon just as important as this river Jordan he told me to jump into 7 times? And he was disgusted, but they suggested you go and do the thing. He took the easy way. He asked the Lord for guidance, and the Lord said, tell him to bathe 7 times. I have found that if you bathe your soul, and then you bathe your mind, and then you bathe your emotions, and then you bathe go to a spa and drink lots of water and bathe your inner self, and then you bathe your lungs by breathing right, bathe your blood vessels by giving the right kind of vitamins and fresh vegetables and so on, and bathe your outer skin. By the time you finish giving those 7 baths, if you do it right, especially the first one, bathing the soul, that you're pretty likely to get well. And I've written a book, 2 books on healing, in which both cases I take up the 7 baths of Jordan. I still think there's a marvelous significance in that. And the interesting thing is that Elisha had more answers to prayer than anyone in the Old Testament. They were not big answers. He wasn't as big a man. He was just a more efficient technician in prayer. I've done some things in prayer, and I've written 20 books about it. And Elisha did more things than I did. Why didn't he at least write 1 book? He didn't write a 1. But in the first 7 verses of the 6th chapter of the 2nd book of Kings, you will find the whole secret of Elisha's method of prayer, which was the method they used in the first Camp Farthest Out. If we learn how to pray as they learned back in those days and apply it, we'll find it just as effective today. I rather like to get things by hidden codes. I've written a textbook on the short story in which I use all kinds of inferences. I teach my student writers to become sort of amateur detectives. I tell them to describe the interior of a room, for instance, to reveal that the indweller is a millionaire and that it has been occupied by robbers who are scared away suddenly. And they're not to have anybody come in or anything. They've just got to show it by the interior, the whole thing. I received a telephone call one day from the police reporter of a big newspaper. And he said, you are a psychologist, are you not? And I said, no, I'm not. Well, you've written a book that goes into a lot of hidden inferences, how to unravel secret codes. And I said, yes, a textbook on the short story. Well, we found the coat of a man on the high bridge. And we found in it a note which said, goodbye, old world. I hope they will not find my body, so it won't cause my wife that extra expense. And it's signed by a certain name. Do you think that he committed suicide? The police are getting ready to drag the river, and they want to get some experts' opinion. And I said, no, he did not commit suicide. And he said, why? In the first place, he wouldn't take his coat off. The coat would help him to drown a little faster. Then if he wrote that note, he wouldn't put in it, I hope they won't find my body, so it won't cause my family that extra expense. That's to remove any criticism of the family if they don't push a lot of dragging of the river. And he said, thank you. That night, the paper came out with a great column all about me and expanded that into a whole column. And the leading headlines, famous psychologist says that Mr. J.K. Borden did not commit suicide. And my wife, when she read that, she was startled and she was scared. She never do a thing like that, Glenn. Why, if he didn't commit suicide, he may come out and commit murder. Later on, they discovered that he is heavily in debt and that he had fled to another state and that my inference was correct. Now, I love to trace codes. During the First World War, they discovered that many phonograph records were being smuggled through Spain into Germany. They intercepted many, found they're perfectly innocent, thought they'd just dropped the whole thing, but in one of the war offices, one of the French detectives happened to have neglected to wind the phonograph, and suddenly, as it was running down, he heard a mysterious click, clickety-click, click, click, click. And he discovered by letting these run very slowly, there was a little secret signals. And when they decoded it, they found that all the information about the movement of the Allied armies and Allied navies were being smuggled in. All they had to do was to let the machine go slowly enough, and they could read the code. I have found that if I sit down before the Bible, almost any passage, Zeta Sherry this afternoon gave a wonderful expression of one who loves the Bible, and her passages that just had meanings, they just rolled out. She would sit down in front of the Bible and just get quiet, and she'd get deep meanings in this passage or that passage. You try it sometime. Open to the 91st Psalm or the 104th Psalm or one of the chapters in the Gospel, and just sit there for a while and get quiet, and you'll find great hidden secret codes, meanings coming forth. And so let us get quiet before these few verses and hear it moves on. The young man was chopping away on one of the trees, and all of a sudden the axe head flies out into the river. And he cries, "Alas, it was borrowed." Now the axe handle is what we usually take hold of. Many of us don't go any farther than the axe handle. By the axe handle, I mean if you go to college and want to give messages, you learn all the gestures, but you don't get the soul of the thing. I've seen some wonderful orators. I know I went over to give us, was one of to be 3 speakers on prayer 25 years ago in Minneapolis. I had just written a book, and the man that came before me gave a wonderful talk on prayer. The minister gave a marvelous talk on prayer. And then after it was the convention, the meetings were all over, he came to me secretly and he said, "Those were just words. I've got the handle, but I don't have the fine edge. I haven't had any experience with prayer. Everything I said was just borrowed. I mean, it was just the mechanics of it." Now, I want to say this. That young man cried it was borrowed. If you have any power in your prayer, you'll find it's borrowed. If there's any power in the speakers, Mary Light or myself or any of us that speak here, we'll have to confess frankly that we aren't any great orators at all. We're no great shakes as orators. If there's any power, it's all from the man upstairs. And if we lose that which is borrowed, we've lost everything. I sometimes think with our churches, we've just worked with the handles. If we could all get into the prayer, every Christian in America believed as thoroughly in prayer as some of you folks believe, as Mary Light believes, why, what would happen? Why, we could just pray this whole world out of its misery and trouble. But you can't do it. You can't cut down any evil forces with just the handle. Well, now here comes the secret code. "Where did you lose it?" said Elisha. Now, that's the first thing you should ask. Even the psychiatrists ask that. They'll sit down in front of you. You'll have them sit there, or the psychiatrist will have you stretch out there on a couch, and he sits behind you, and then he asks you questions. And then he charges you $50 for that half hour, and then you come the next week, and he gives you another $50. You give him another $50. Before I started the first Camp Farthest Out, I was speaking in Harry Emerson Fosdick's church, and a woman came to me and she said, "I've spent $10,000. I have gone to see a psychiatrist twice a week for 2 years, and he still can't find the place where this thing began." I said, "Next summer we're going to have a Camp Farthest Out, the first one we've ever had. You come down there and we'll see if we can't find the problem," and we did. And today you go to Gold Farm, a place where the broken down folks go to get healed, you'll find that this woman is the rock of Gibraltar there. She's the one that lifts them all up. And so the psychiatrists say, "Where did you lose it?" And that's what Jesus did, the first psychiatrist that ever lived. When the man came with a boy that fell into a fit, into an epileptic condition, the first thing that Jesus said was, where did he first lose this power? Where did this thing begin? Of a child. It would throw him into fire sometimes, and sometimes into the water. All right, that tells me where it begins. Now I'm going to tell you where it ends. You take hold where it begins, and at the end, you take a log that's in the house and you toss it out. But I'd like to get hold of where it begins. And then he just healed him like that. I received a letter from my daughter in Dayton, Ohio, and she said, a lovely woman, Mrs. Arnold here, has a daughter, a young married daughter in Greenville, South Carolina, who hasn't been able to eat anything for 4 years. I mean, hold anything. She's only held 4 meals in the 4 years. Well, how does she live? She eats 10 big square meals a day, and she just holds them for about 10 minutes, about 2 or 3 minutes. And that's the way she keeps alive, but she's gradually fading away. She's getting to be skin and bones. The doctors examined her and find nothing the matter with her body, nor with her nerves, or anything else, and it's a mystery. Mrs. Arnold wants to know if she'll pay her way clear up to St. Paul. Will you pray for her? Well, now, I don't have any power in prayer. I mean, I never have healed anyone. God does the healing. And when I'm a channel enough, and if they have the faith enough, God gets to work. Well, I didn't want anyone to spend the hundreds of dollars to come up there just to have me sit and pray. I said, I'm going down to Atlanta in a month to be speaking in the First Methodist Church. She could perhaps ride over there, and I could pray with her there. So she came, she and her husband. I asked her, when did this first begin? Where did you lose it? Where did you lose your power to eat food? She said, when I first married, I thought that if I got too fat, my husband would stop loving me. I said, now your subconscious heard you say that, and the subconscious has a lot more to do with one's condition than any of his conscious mind. We'll call the subconscious a junior. Little junior heard you say that, and junior will do anything for his mistress. He will, when he heard you didn't want to get too fat, he said, all right, I'll see that you don't get too fat. I'll see you don't get any fat. I said, are you afraid your husband will stop loving you now? No, I should say not. He stuck through me through thick and thin, especially thin, and I said, well, little junior, you heard her say that. She wants to get some fat now. I want to thank you, little junior, for being so faithful to see that she didn't get any fat. You were so obedient, but you misunderstood the situation. Now you heard her say that she wants to get some, and you're hearing me say that, and I'm going to command you to see that she gets plenty of fat now. And I said, you come to breakfast tomorrow at my hotel, you and your husband, and eat a big breakfast. She gained 35 pounds, which brought her up just to the shape of a Venus de Milo. I have to explain that. What women all run from me if they think I'm going to pray for them with that effect. However, if they're too thin, you can pray yourself into better. If you're too fat, maybe you can pray it down. Well, before the year's over, I was in Greenville, South Carolina, speaking in the First Methodist Church. It was so packed, 1,200 people. They had to sit in the aisles, and they had to turn away 100. And I said to the minister, do they turn out like this? Oh, no, he said. But for all year long, every time they'd meet Mrs. Carnes out on the street, they'd stop and say, what's happened to you? And she'd say, you come to the Methodist Church on 14th of February, and you'll see what happened to me. She is chairman of the council ring of this North Carolina camp. We have to have 2 camps every year. She is one of the leaders in the prayer group work in Greenville. Her mother is so thrilled, not only that her life was saved, but because her soul was so saved. That's the thing that thrills her so. Where did you lose it? Where did you begin? I could go back and tell a great many experiences there. I could tell how Mary Welch, skin and bones, because she couldn't eat peas or drink milk or eat tomatoes. As the years will go when she didn't want to live. She'd heard someone say those 3 things are very life-giving, and after that, If she ate one of them, she got headaches. If the other one, she got stomach ulcers. If she ate the other one, she'd get the rheumatism. And then we found she was happy now, and she'd wish she had 9 lives to live. And so he talked to little Junior and said, now, you see that she can eat those. Now, you come to dinner table tonight, and you eat tomatoes, eat peas, and drink milk. And she gained 35 pounds, and she's speaking all over the nation now. There is a real secret there. The psychiatrists use it. Well, we like to find those things. But now here comes the real Camp Farthest Out method. He then took a stick, and he tossed it out where the thing had been lost, and then the axe head came swimming up to the surface. Some people think, of course, that must have been a mere superstition, that the heavy axe head couldn't swim. But I got on a building that was 20 times the length of this building, made of steel and iron, and it floated, and it carried me across to Europe. Last year, I got on a building as long as this, made of steel and iron, and it floated, and it carried me through the air all around the world. Regular magic carpet. To me, an axe head floating up through the water is nothing to discuss. It's how it came, and this is the how. First, he took hold of something that he could grasp with his hand, not a little straw that would flow away, and a great big eucalyptus tree, something that fitted his grasp, and tossed it out there, and it came up. That is the method that Jesus used. He called them parables. He'd take parallel situations. Here's a woman that wanted to get love into her family. And he said, well, put some leaven into 3 measures of meal, and presently the whole loaf will be leavened. Well, that worked with bread. Well, you take the same faith that you put in that pinch of leaven, and you put the same quality of faith that you can take hold of in love, and put love into those 3 measures of men in your home, those sons and that husband, and just see the whole home get leavened. Roland Brown had, in his church at Parkside, Chicago, had a troublemaker. His wife said, supposing you love her, an old cranky woman. And he began to just shoot love at her, and presently she was all changed. A grouchy deacon that just was a thorn in his flesh. His wife said, why don't you send love to him? Send love to him, huh? Love to him, huh? He didn't see how he could do that. And she said, well, it worked with that old lady, you try it. So he did. And then there's a third one. He put love into 3 measures of people, and that whole church was leavened. They asked him to come to Benton Harbor, and he found a captain of the police, and he found a leading politician that just hated each other. And they wanted to start living this life, and he said, well, is anyone you hate? Each one saw them separately, and they mentioned the other person. Well, I believe that'd be a good place to begin. What do you think you ought to do? Well, I suppose I ought to pray for him and love him, and I don't know how. You'll have to show me. Well, he got those 2 men together, and they knelt down there. It was after midnight, and they prayed, I suspect, most of all night, and they got to love each other. Benton Harbor, the crime rate there, I think, was about as high as any city in America. And now that leading politician is the mayor of Benton Harbor, and that police captain is the chief of police, and the crime rate is the lowest, one of the lowest in all America. He just put that love into there, and he changed the city. You can make this. You see the miracle of taking hold of a thing with faith, as Jesus put it? There's a woman who had a hemorrhage, and John Hopkins couldn't help her, and Mayo Hospital couldn't. Why couldn't they? Well, because she couldn't get to them. Was that too bad? Couldn't we lend her some money so she could buy the railroad ticket? Well, she was too far away, not in space, but in time. She lived 2,000 years before Mayo Hospital had been built. Well, what could she do? She said, I make the clothes for my family, and I put love into those clothes, and I hem them up very carefully, and there's no frays, no tears in them. Now, God made my body, and the man of Galilee said on the mountain that if a father, if his son asked for bread, he wouldn't give him a stone. And if I love a garment that I make so carefully that I can hem it up, Why can't God, who made my body, love it enough to hem me up? And then she said, the most marvelous garment I've seen is that garment, all of one piece and woven from above, worn by that man of Galilee. I know this, that if I could take hold of that hem of that garment, it would give me just the faith all up through I could just feel it vibrating through my whole being. I could just feel that God could take hold of my body and he could hem it up. Whatever woman made that garment must have put love into it, but she couldn't hold a candle to the love that a God of love had put into the making of my body. But how could I do it, she said, if she told her neighbor, and the neighbor said, why, if anyone saw you grab a man of God by the hem of his garment, they would say, there's a woman of the street, and they would just be only too glad to take you out of the city walls and stone you to death. And so that chance of healing was lost. But as the crowd was gathering, and she noticed women packed together there, and he's going down through that crowd, a daring scheme came to her mind. If I got behind that group of women, and when he came by, if I knelt down and reached under their garments and just touched the hem of his, no one would know it. I could do it. And she did it, and no one knew it. And to this day, her name and fame, the episode had never gotten into that great divine classic of the New Testament. But the man of Galilee always knew when someone touched him with faith, and he said, somebody touched me. Why, of course, the disciples said, why, they thronged you. Everybody touched you. You bumped against 100 people. Why are you going to bother to go back? No, he said, I'm not talking about the external touch. Somebody touched me with that living faith, and something has happened to them. I'm going back. And he went back. And that woman has gone down in history. They're even singing songs about her. Why, well, there's no one that's more dramatic in all that's happened, because Jesus came back and he saw her flashing face, radiant now, and he said, thy faith has made thee whole. Now, there's this one school of modern religion that say that when the Bible closed, that the curtain went down on every miracle. You can't expect answered prayers. Healing should not be brought into the churches. That ended with Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth, who said, greater works than I have done ye shall do. Because I go into the Father, and my wishes multiplied in power by infinity will come down in the form of the Holy Spirit and will just release new power. A woman came to me in a Texas camp, and she said, I have a flow of blood. I have an inner hemorrhage, and I wish you'd pray for me. And I took her into the prayer room with Roberta Fletcher, who was the prayer hostess, and I said, kneel down in front of this great picture of Solomon, the presence. I have seen him paint. He's a spiritual, a Christ-like man himself. He put a lot of love into that picture. And he noticed how beautifully hemmed up that garment is. And I told her about the woman of 2,000 years away. And I said, now you touch the hem of the garment in that picture. And know this, that Mr. Solomon didn't love that picture as much as God loved you and your body when he made you. And if he could hem that up with his paintbrush, God can hem you up with his infinite divine love. She knelt and touched the hem, and Roberta and I prayed, and she was healed instantly, and it has never come back. 2 months later, with coronas, a woman came to me and said, I've got to leave. Just one day I've been here, and I'm just so thrilled. I just was terribly disappointed to get this letter from my daughter. Ever since her second child came, she's had an inward flow of blood. And here comes this letter. The doctor told me today that my blood count is getting so low that it won't be safe to wait. He's going to operate on me next week. And so she said, I'm going to phone in for a plane ticket and leave tomorrow. And I said, just wait a minute. Let us come in to the chapel. There's a picture of Solomon's Jesus, but there the sheep were all around the hem of the garment, and we had to have her step on her tiptoes and touch the folds of the garment. And I told her the woman 2,000 years away in Galilee and the woman 2,000 miles away in Texas. And I said, now you touch this, and I'm going to pray for the healing and the hemming up of your daughter's trouble. And when I finished praying, I think I felt a lot of faith here. I just felt it tremendously. I have a feeling that your daughter is healed. I'm going to suggest you write a letter and send it by airmail. Ask her to reply by return mail. It'll take 2 days to get out there, 2 days to get back, and so you'll still have 2 days or 3 days to get there before the week is up. Ask your daughter just how she feels, when the operation's to be, and when she wants you to come. She wrote the letter. 4 days later, she came with a reply. She said, I just came from the doctor. He said all my organs are now perfectly sound. The healing must have come here 2 days ago, he said. That's exactly the day we were praying. And I won't need an operation. I was telling this last year out at the Portland Camp Farthest Out. A woman was sitting in the back seat, a white-haired lady, rose, and she said, I am that mother that prayed with you at Coronas. Trouble, she was instantly healed, and it never came back. I've just received a letter today, it just came here, and I have it in my hand, that her third child has come, and it just came this week, and it's a perfectly normal birth, and everything is sound and well. I've had 2 other experiences of this, but I'm not going any farther, or you'll say you should stick out a sign, become a specialist on that one thing. Folks, if you can get the right leverage and the right atmosphere, the right attitude, I'm not going to gamble and do any daring things on this, or stick out my neck out in an external way. These people came to a camp farthest out. They were trusting in prayer. They had faith in my prayer. They had faith in this parable. There's something in them happened that I'm not sure could always happen. But I want to say that because this has happened so often, I have found that you could go home now, if you had a situation like that, you could find trusting that and using that leverage of Jesus of Nazareth. That's the hem of something that was sewed up with love, with love, and marvelous things could come. Why? Because I always wear I have one suit of clothes. Buy one suit of clothes about every 3rd year and wear it winter and summer, and have the old one of the 3 years before for other things. Down south, they felt sorry for me going around in a winter suit, and they took a suit of mine in to be pressed, and they got the measurements, and they sent a blue serge suit, summer suit here. It reached me here. It didn't quite fit, so Bernie Warfield took me down to a tailor, and we had it put in shape, and I've been wearing that until finally it's 3 years ago, and I've just getting ready to give it the goodwill. I wore it all through the heat of the South in India, and all that. But actually happened right here, and this is what happened. When I left this, I went to Indianapolis, and a businessman took me out to the hospital because his wife is having a hemorrhage of the stomach, and because of an operation, and they couldn't stop it. And I said, we don't have any picture of Jesus here, but here's a garment given to me in love. And I'm going to ask you to touch the hem of this garment, and we'll pray. And when I reached Cleveland, there came down to my meeting the son of that family and said, I just got a telephone that the day after my mother was taken home all healed, that touch of the garment did it. I could go on and tell you these things, but the reason why I brought that in is because it happened right here. That garment was all put in shape here with the love of Bernie. I don't think he ever has his suits made by a tailor. I think that he gets cheaper ones. That's what I used to do. But at any rate, he hit me down, and just was around with the love. I don't know if they charged me anything. Well, here it is. They put that aside. Get hold of a leverage. And then you say, now, Glenn Clark must be rolling in money. All he has to do is to use the lever and pull in the money, I want to tell you this. When I was 40 years old, I didn't own a car. If you give your life to the Lord and really want to tithe your income and have 3 children and live on a college professor's salary and make payments on a house, you can't afford a car. And so we'd go out Sunday afternoon. My wife would push the baby carriage, the little 2 months old. I'd pull a little wagon with a little 2-year-old. And our little 4-year-old in a white dress would trot along and inspect all the gutters and the alleys. And after about 8 blocks, we'd return to our porch, all exhausted, and watch the neighbors go out in their Cadillacs and their Fords to pick the flowers in beautiful southern Minnesota. And one day I said to my wife, when the children are little, we ought to have a cheap touring car, just the cheapest Ford car you can find. And she looked it up, and she told me the next day we could, if you had $100 more, we could safely make the payments. Otherwise, we'll be in debt for life. I said, in that case, we better push the baby carriage. Well, I said last summer, though, I get something here. I get one of these levers I can take hold of. Our little 4-year-old dug a well in the seashore sand, and she waited patiently till the tides came in and filled it. She had to wait quite a while, but she knew they would come. Let us think of the need for $100 as a little well, and just leave it to the Lord. And if He wants us to have the car, He can send in the tides. With all the 7 oceans, He ought to have plenty to fill a little well, if He really wants us to have it. But if it's a mere shadow of a well, a mere wishful thinking, He won't need to fill it. We'll leave it to Him. 10 days later, a young man rang our bell one night, and he said, I represent a Ford agency, and I understand you're planning to buy a Ford touring car. That was exactly what we were thinking about, but we hadn't told anyone but the Lord. That was the first time I discovered that Henry Ford must have some private pipeline to the Lord. We told him the situation. He said, well, you'll have to decide by a week from Monday, or I can't guarantee a car of that make this year. When he left, I said, well, Lord, there's a little well, and if you want to fill it, it's up to you, and we'll abide by your wish. A week from Monday, a letter came. I opened it out and out fell a check for $108. The letter told how I'd been a teacher at another college for 12 years before, and as I tithed, I'd given $100 to the endowment fund, and now it was becoming a junior college, and was returning the last $100,000 to the donors. I've been connected with the colleges all my professional life, and the biggest miracle ever happened to me was the college giving back some of its endowment fund. My wife was embarrassed. She's a good Presbyterian, and to have a prayer answered like that, she said, now they'll call us New Thought or Christian Sciences or some cult or other, and all the members of the board, all the board of trustees of McAllister College are either Presbyterian elders or Presbyterian ministers. And I've been brought up in the Presbyterian church, and I know they wouldn't like this. My father was brought up a Methodist, my mother a Presbyterian, and when they married, they compromised and became Congregationalists. I was brought up a Congregationalist, my wife was brought up a Presbyterian, and when we married, we compromised and became Presbyterians. Now, I always thought Presbyterians were more pious than Congregationalists. So I thought they would welcome this, but she said no. But I went to see an old lady. Oh, yes, I said, I'm going to use this power now. I promised my wife that we wouldn't use it for our family anymore. Didn't have to. After that money came in as we needed it. So I said, what we need is a gymnasium. All the other colleges have fine gymnasiums, and I have to take my boys out and have them wade in the snow, the track boys, to get in shape for the spring training. I'm going to down to the trustees and tell them about my answered prayers and ask them if they won't let me pray with them for a gymnasium. And then my wife said no. So I went to see a dear old lady and asked her what she thought about it. She said, you and your wife been praying for that gymnasium? And I said, yes. Well, you won't need to see the trustees. As you were talking, I could see that gymnasium coming. It's going to come before anyone expects. It's going to come this year. It's going to come from a student in your writing class. Well, she was getting too specific, so I left before she told me whether it be a blonde or brunette. And I went home and told my wife I decided to take her advice and not see the trustees. And then I told her about this strange prophecy, and we laughed it aside. But in the middle of the winter, a little sophomore girl working her way entirely through college, didn't have a cent of her own to her name, came up and said, can I see you, Prop? I said, I've some important people to see, promised to see, and I'll see you some other time. And I turned my back and left a gymnasium standing in the center of that room. To this day, I can't remember who those important people were, but 2 days later, when that class convened again, here's that little sophomore girl. She said, you know, Prof, we honor the football boys. We give them a banquet at the end of the season, and we give them letters and sweaters and honor them. We cheer them when they play. But we have 20 trustees, and 6 of them have worked for the college for 20 years, and we've never done anything to honor them. It occurred to me it'd be a nice thing if the students, not the faculty, but just the students, would give a party to the trustees. My knees got weak because I could see a gymnasium floating right in. I have asked many places all over the world if they've ever known of a case where the students, not the faculty, but the students ever gave a party to the trustees, and they've never heard of such a thing anywhere. Well, I suggested we appoint 5 students, or representative folks, that would represent this at the next convocation of the student body and see what they voted. They voted to do the thing. All the trustees came. The next week, the trustees sat around a table, and they said, those are wonderful boys and girls of ours. First time I ever realized what a marvelous privilege it is to be a trustee. Why, they're just like a family of sons and daughters. Well, we ought to do something for them. Well, what do they need? Well, they need a gymnasium. Well, depression or no depression, let's give them a gymnasium. And they pulled out $200,000 and laid on the table. And the finest gymnasium of any college in the Middle West went up, and we had an open winter, the first time I ever heard of a thing like that. You could put a spade in the ground in February, and that gymnasium went up. And Jimmy Dixon, my long-distance runner, running around that indoor track, fell in love with that little Lillian. And when they graduated, they married and went to Formosa. And folks, when we came to Formosa, we found Lillian. She had been, and James Dixon, they were on a furlough, and we were afraid they wouldn't be there, but she was called back for some occasion a week before we arrived, and she just arranged everything she asked for happened. Why, she even came out and met us outright at the plane. They could let her walk right through the gates to receive people. We found she took us out and had us address the lepers, thousands of lepers, and she has just been saving them, and they're stopping their committing suicide by making things happy and creative. And I talked to them on the Fanner bees, and she rose when I finished my talk, and she said, I'm going to promise you, Glenn Clark, that we're going to have 25 prayer groups here. And I got a letter just a little while ago that they were starting those prayer groups, and she's gotten a gift of a new house or two, building or two, and they're finding ways of curing these lepers. Out in front of me was a vested choir, all men, Chinese men, members of the army of Chiang Kai-shek that come down to leprosy. They rose and they sang a solo. Over here was a mixed choir, beautiful girls, and these handsome young men, doomed for life. She is just the angel that just holds them up. And then they took us up into the mountains, where the headhunters are. The headhunters, you couldn't, couldn't be accepted in polite society until they could bring home a head. Now what's happened? These Dixons, he's president, the way of the Presbyterian Theological Seminary where we spoke. They send their students up there, converting them, and those headhunters have built 160 churches in the last 5 years, built them with their own hands without a cent of help from American churches. They're being manned by the Dixons and these students. We went up there and we found, as we traveled along through the mountains, everyone who had a shining, radiant face, he's a Christian. The Christians don't drink nor smoke, and they're not permitted to join the church until they've brought a soul in. Instead of bringing a head in, they bring in souls now. It's the fastest moving, the most outstanding movement in all the history of modern missions. The thing that is moving all through those mountains. Those headhunters are becoming the most marvelous soul hunters of all Asia. Well, there it is. I was during the Second World War, when the Dixons had been driven out. I was driving her across from Minneapolis to St. Paul to address a church, and she said, "Prof, do you remember the first spadeful of dirt dug up for that gymnasium? You put some of it in a little glass bottle and you gave to me." "I'd forgotten that," I said. Well, she said, that bottle's been with me from Formosa and Japan and wherever I go. I said, well, you hold fast to that. That is when you just erase yourself, just like the clay that the Christ come walking in. Yes, when I was in India, Stanley Jones came and gave an address in our Camp Farthest Out, and he said, if you're going to Formosa, there's a missionary that you must meet, the most wonderful missionary. Her first name is Lillian. I've forgotten her last name. I said, her last name is Dixon. Roland Brown said, why, she was a student. She's a disciple of Glenn Clark. Oh, he said. And when we had that time, that week down at Topeka in 1950, and when my book came out, What Would Jesus Do?, a sequel to In His Steps, down there, all the ministers and the mayor and all the city turned over the municipal auditorium for us. We held meetings all week, and I had great speakers. One of them was Daniel Poling, and he flew all the way from Formosa to get there in time. And when we were eating supper, he just all the time he said, "What you do? I had the most wonderful meeting out there. There's the most wonderful mission I ever met. Her name is Lillian Dixon. Her husband is president of the theological seminary." And I just let him talk and talk and talk. And when he finished, I said, "Now I'm going to tell you something that happened at McAllister." I told him where the gymnasium came, and when he got to address that audience, packed audience, 1,200 people, about every other sentence, he'd turn around and he'd say, "Now, Glenn Frank," he's got my name mixed, "I've got to tell you tomorrow about that wonderful missionary. Now, you remember now, and you tell him about that missionary. And after all, you don't forget it." And so I did. Well, all these things are wonderful. You get hold of the lever, and a gymnasium floated in, and then we used the same lever, and the McAllister, the poorest college, Presbyterian College, of all the 57 colleges, is today the richest, because we use the same lever. However, I have found the lever that I can take hold of best of all is that statement of Jesus, where 2 or 3 agree. We use that almost like a religion. I don't care to have you touch the hymns, the garments and things, but if you want to have a power in your home, get harmony. If you want to have power in your church, get harmony. If you want to have power in your business, get harmony. Why do I know? Jesus said, where 2 or 3 agree, whatsoever they ask in Jesus' name will be done. And the word agree comes from the same Greek word our orchestra comes from, orchestration, symphony. My father came to Des Moines as a young man and a lawyer, and a company he'd invested some money in was failing, and finally they asked him to come in and see if he could save it. He didn't know insurance, but he knew men, so he invited agents in from all over the state of Iowa, and he said, now we want to be one big happy family. He created harmony. They went out and they doubled their business within a year. He was made manager of agents of another company, they doubled their business within a year. He was made president of another company, they doubled their business within a year. Ralph Budd, young man, taught me mathematics in high school, used to go out and study my father's methods. When he became president of the Great Northern, when he found I lived in St. Paul, he'd have me come down and look over his methods. He said, I'm using your father's methods. I built that marvelous harmony here, and there are more people. Men are getting better salaries than other companies will do anything to get into a place where there's this harmony. And it succeeded. They made him president of Burlington. And he's now retired, and his little boy is now president of Great Northern. And the Time magazine said practically half the railroad presidents of America got their training under Ralph Budd. If you want success in business, get together and symphonize together. I was talking before a group of men of University of California, Leland Stanford, out at Selamar. We were having a camp farthest out. That's such a big campgrounds that they have to have 2 camps at the same time. And they invited me one afternoon to come over and talk to them. A bunch of cynical young men in discussion groups. And I said, 25 years ago, there's a man named Red Grange at the Illinois University, and he's been voted the greatest halfback of the last 50 years. His team defeated all the Big Ten teams by immense scores. They hadn't played Minnesota yet, and Minnesota lost by immense scores to the same teams. So when Illinois came up to play Minnesota, I went over to see the game, expecting to see Illinois win 80 to nothing. And to my surprise, Minnesota won 27-7. The next week, one of the men came over and he said, you'll be interested, Mr. Clark, to know that we used your philosophy last week. The Thursday night before the game, the team got together and we said, we know what's the matter with us. We're divided into 3 rival fraternities. Let's bury the hatchet. And then one of the boys named Shooty said, fellas, there's one thing we haven't tried yet. And they said, what? Prayer. Not one of them knew how to pray, so they said, Shooty, you'll have to do it. And so he stumbled through a little awkward prayer that they would do their best. Then I said to these men, not a one of you, I could see not a one of them had been believing anything I was saying. I said, not a one of you ever heard of Shooty. You all heard of Red Grange. Red Grange made 7 points that day, and Shooty made 27 points. Then a young man leaped to his feet, and he on the back row, and he said, I wasn't believing a word you said until now. Mr. Shooty's son is my best pal. Mr. Shooty is the coach of a football team, a college team on the Pacific Coast, and his team wins first place nearly every year in his league. And he has a better influence on the boys than the president of the college has. Fellas, you better listen to that guy. He knows what he's talking about. I want to say the Camps Farthest Out is a living example of that. We have harmony always in that council ring. I used to go to meetings of conventions, and I'd sit down with the leaders and the committees in charge. And I'd find a bitterness between the evangelist and the psychologist. Psychologist thought the evangelist was an old fogey. The evangelist thought the psychologist was the son of the devil. And there's that bitterness, and there's no power. You just could go that high. And I said, if I just made some discoveries. Someday I'm going to start a camp where we can at least prove this thing. Why, the little splits. If you were in a church where they have division, the first thing you do when you go back, start to pray and break that down. Dr. Brower, the pastor of the largest Baptist church on the Pacific Coast, said, my little son said, Mrs. Jones, president of the Ladies' Aid, reminds me of a porcupine. Why? She got a lot of fine points, but you can't get close to her. And then he said, I'd rather have a drunkard in my church than a troublemaker, and any minister here will agree with me. Every minister here will agree with me. These troublemakers are the bane of the church. It is the vice of the virtuous, said Drummond, and the greatest thing in the world, that so many Christians think they have a right to have some righteous indignation. And they're pouring out righteous indignation, judging this and judging that and criticizing this. Well, there's the power. We can stop there. Now, find the lever you have, and I began to find leverages in the illnesses. And a woman came to me, had a goiter and a tumor, and I said, was anything in the past that you wanted very much that you couldn't have? And she said, yes. I was envious of other people that had it. Are you willing to relinquish it now? And she said, yes. And I said, all right, let's throw it out the window. I said, here's a woman that had a little Ford car, and their neighbor got a Cadillac. And she wanted a Cadillac, but she couldn't afford it, and she really didn't need it. But if you want a thing hard enough, you'll get it. And she wanted to keep up with the Joneses, so she got a Cadillac, put it in her garage. It was too big, and it stuck out. And where it sticks out, we'll call that a growth. Now, you wanted some things that didn't fit in you, and they stick out in the form of growth. If you can relinquish this wish of yours and get contented and at peace, all will be well. I've written a booklet called The Lord's Prayer, and in it you'll find a divine plan. You take this booklet and shake it every morning and read that divine plan just like you're taking medicine. Do that for the next 3 weeks, and I'll pray for you. At the end of 3 weeks, she wrote, I just came from the doctor. He said my goiter and tumor are vanishing away, and I won't need an operation. That led me to write a book called How to Find Help Through Prayer, in which I tried to find the causes behind each disease. Some people rather scoffed at it, but in a few years later, all the magazines burst forth with a new discovery of the doctors called psychosemantics, and they laid the same causes. If you have asthma, it's because you have too much self-pity. Or if it's a child, it's because they're tied too much to the mother's apron string. And if you yearn for something that doesn't belong to you, it manifests as a growth. And if you have a lot of resentment in it, hidden resentment, it may become malignant. However, people who have cancer are not sinners. You'll find in their past someone has been very unjust to them. Very, very unjust. Very unjust. They have been very polite and didn't tell anybody. They just concealed it. Some of you know Ray Chittick, my beloved brother-in-law, the most spiritual man in many ways, I think, that ever walked the streets of Chicago. He was chemist for a great baking powder company. The two old men who owned it just brought him in and they practically made him vice president. That is, they leaned on him as if he was vice president. That during the World War, they couldn't use certain things, and he invented a new device, a new combination that is better than the old things, and he saved the company $600,000 every year. But when the two old men died, the son came in and came around and said, "We're going to get rid of you older men. I want to put in a lot of new men." Ray said, "I'd like to stay in 2 years longer. I'm working on an invention that's going to save your company a lot." "Oh, we can get along all right." And he gave him a pension of $50 a month. And after a couple of years, he sent a letter that our business hasn't been doing very well after getting all these young bloods in that didn't know how to run the business. It was going down somewhat. So we'll have to cease sending you the gratuity. Calling it a gratuity, a man who'd saved the company millions of dollars. If the old men had lived, they probably would like to have made him president. But I said to my sister, and he died of cancer, I said, "Was there any injustice done to him?" She says, "I'm sorry to say there was." And she told me about it. But she said, Ray said, "Don't let's tell anybody. Let's just try to forget it. Let's just try to forgive him." And he tried to forget it. But down inside, it was there, gnawing away. Senator Taft died unexpectedly from cancer. And why? They didn't know the cause of it. They discovered where they could find where it began. They could have gone at it. Down in Texas, they accused his group of trying to steal the votes. The one thing, the most honest man in all the Senate. Everybody, even the opponents, had great respect for Senator Taft. But politicians would be politicians, and they were all blaming. They were trying to get the votes away from the Taft delegation and all that, and they claimed things. But now Taft is just so sensitive that he was polite. He wasn't going to wreck the party he just quietly concealed it inside. And it manifested just like that. You can always tell. The doctors told me I can tell what a man's thinking when he comes to diagnose what his trouble is. If I could only gotten to Taft and said, our anger is the punishment we inflict upon ourselves because of the wrongdoing of another. Now, if he had been a McCarthy and had sworn it all out in profanity and all the papers and everything else, he wouldn't have died of cancer, he'd have died of apoplexy. Well, I want to say the most powerful leverage in the world was described beautifully by Zeta Sherry this afternoon. We can sometimes smile. I want to say I deal with the intellectuals who can't quite understand about what they call the blood of Jesus. And I don't talk about the blood of Jesus in the colleges. They wouldn't understand quite what it meant. But Starr Daily said, "I never knew of a thoroughly conditioned criminal who's ever changed by psychology or penology or anything but the redemptive power of Jesus Christ. Marvelous power. You can't explain it by philosophy. Just can't explain it. I just cannot explain it. It doesn't seem logical. Why, a theosophist said to Starr Daily, you will have to go through 77 reincarnations before you can work off the karma that you've caused by this 25 years in the underworld. It'll be like a mole digging its way through a mountain." And Starr just laughed him aside. He said, "I won't have to go through all those reincarnations." He said, reincarnation, he said, is for those who live by law. Heaven is for those who live by grace. He said, all my sins were washed away by the love of Jesus Christ. You can't explain it. Over there in India, they couldn't understand it. And over in India, you find people suffering. They say, well, how did you do something? Oh, if you don't help that person dying and suffering and all that, if you save him now and heal him, then in the next incarnation, he'll have to go through all that suffering. Let him get all his punishment through all this suffering now, and then he can have a happier life in his next incarnation, so they don't have any mercy for anybody. Why, I want to just tell you, the more you travel around, the more you find Jesus Christ, who hung on a cross, crossed out the little I with a dot over it on the outstretched arms of love. Whenever we cross out the little I with a dot over it on the outstretched arms of love, we become a channel by which marvelous things come. Little Lillian Dixon is just erasing herself out of the picture, just bringing marvelous things into Formosa. And Jesus, there he hung on the cross. And then they all laughed at him. They said, he saved others, why didn't he save himself? And here all his disciples had run away. The only one that remained was a relative. The strongest of his disciples had denied him, and the weakest had betrayed him. And there he hangs on the cross. Now, what does he say? Does he say, Matthew, you write a story of my life, and Peter, you build a big church, and Stephen, you collect a lot of money? No, those things happened afterwards. His thought wasn't on what he had to get, but what he had to give. And what does he have to give? Why, silver and gold has he none. Why, the foxes have holes, and the birds have nests, and he has no place to lay his head. They've even taken his garments away. They're casting lots for his robe. And there he hangs with nothing to give, and yet, in his final words, he turns and he gives to the thief paradise. He gives to his mother a son, and he gives to his accusers forgiveness. You can't stop a man like that. If I ever needed any other proof of the divinity of Jesus, that would be enough. One who could give, even up when he had nothing seemingly to give, and giving himself as he did on the cross there for us to live, to be saved. On the outflow of that giving, there's been a flood of devotion and worship and blessing flowing back to him.